Do you feel stuck in the same patterns and mindset?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you know that feeling, right? You set this massive goal, you start out with this huge burst of enthusiasm, but the second you hit a real wall, the second you get that incorrect from life, you find a reason to pivot.
Right, you convince yourself that maybe it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. Or that you just aren't naturally wired for it. And honestly, it's exhausting. But that is exactly why we're dedicating today's mission to uncovering the definitive Mindset Audiobook. If you want to fundamentally rewire how you operate, this is where you start. And you are listening to Deep Dive Audiobook English.
It's just such a vital topic to unpack today. Because that frustration you're feeling, that sensation of being trapped in a loop of starting and stopping, it's incredibly common. But the thing is, it's not a lack of willpower. And it is certainly not a lack of innate talent.
Which is what we always blame it on.
Right, exactly. We always blame the talent. But today, we aren't just giving you another motivational pep talk about trying harder or manifesting success. We are looking at the hard data, the neuroplasticity, and the underlying logic of how human beings approach friction. We're talking about fundamentally rewriting your brain's operating system when it encounters difficulty.
Because, look, here is the core thesis of what we are diving into today. You already know that effort is important. I mean, every motivational poster in the world tells you that.
Hang in there.
Right, the cat on the branch. But what you are missing is how a fixed mindset is secretly limiting your potential and dictating, like, every single choice you make. It's this invisible script running in the background, deciding who you date, how you manage your team, and whether you ultimately succeed or just, plateau.
Yeah, and to understand where this invisible script comes from, we really have to travel back to the origin story of this research. The author of our source material, Dr. Carol Dweck, a renowned Stanford psychologist, she didn't actually set out to write a self-help manual.
No, she didn't at all.
Right. She was a clinical researcher, obsessed with a very specific, deeply human question. Basically, how do people cope with failure?
And she wanted to understand the actual mechanics of resilience. Like, why does one person just completely crumble when they fail a test while another person gets fired up? So in the early days of her research, she designed this beautifully simple experiment. She brought school children, one by one, into a room.
Just a standard lab setting.
Yeah, she made them comfortable, sat them at a table, and started giving them a series of puzzles to solve. And at first, the puzzles were well within their capabilities.
The kids are breezing through them, they feel smart, they feel capable.
Totally. But then, the trap is sprung. She deliberately introduces puzzles that are completely inappropriate for their age level. I mean, the difficulty ramps up intentionally to force a moment of failure.
Precisely. And as the puzzles became difficult, she leaned in and just watched their strategies. She probed what they were thinking and feeling in that exact moment of friction, because the prevailing psychological wisdom of the time suggested that people generally had a unified way of dealing with failure.
Like we all just hate it, basically.
Right, that we all hate it, perhaps just with varying degrees of anxiety or different coping mechanisms. But instead, she witnessed a dichotomy that completely shocked her. A significant portion of the children didn't just cope with the failure, they enthusiastically embraced it.
I love this part.
One boy actually rubbed his hands together, smacked his lips, and literally said, "I love a challenge." Another kid looked up from a frustratingly complex puzzle, smiled, and said, I was hoping this would be informative.
This is hard. This is fun. Like, that was the realization that changed the trajectory of modern psychology. She realized some people actually enjoy the friction.
Yes.
They don't see difficulty as an indictment of their intelligence. They see it as the very vehicle for getting smarter.
Which led to the core framework of her entire body of work. The realization that there are two fundamentally different meanings of the word ability. And, well, to ensure we are anchored in the science today, we must define these terms clearly, right now. The first is what she termed the fixed mindset. This is the deeply held belief that your ability is a rigid, permanent trait.
Like you're just born with a set amount of smarts.
Exactly. In this view, you are dealt a certain hand of intelligence, talent, or personality at birth, and your only job in life is to constantly prove that hand to the world. You are essentially a finished product trying to convince everyone you are of high quality.
And obviously, if you are a finished product, any mistake means the product is defective.
That's the terrifying part, yes.
Yeah.
The second paradigm is the growth mindset. Now, this is the belief that your current ability is merely a starting point. It's the understanding that your fundamental qualities, your intelligence, your creativity, your relational capacities can be changed and developed through learning, strategy, and effort.
That is such a crucial distinction. I mean, In a fixed mindset, your ultimate goal is proving. But in a growth mindset, your ultimate goal is improving.
Proving versus improving.
Exactly. And honestly, looking at the world right now as we navigate the massive economic and technological shifts of 2026, with AI disrupting entire industries overnight and the job market demanding entirely new skill sets every 6 months, the need to adapt and reinvent ourselves is literally a matter of survival.
Oh, without a doubt.
This isn't just about getting better grades in school anymore. It's about whether you have the psychological flexibility to evolve fast enough to stay relevant in the modern economy.
It is arguably the most urgent psychological skill of the decade.
So let's explore exactly how this plays out in real time, because the author argues that the fixed mindset actively turns people into non-learners.
It does. And the mechanism behind this is fascinating. In a fixed mindset, because your highest priority is proving you are smart, you will systematically avoid any situation that might show a deficiency. Think about the logic here. If your intelligence is a static, unchanging number, then every single task, every test, every conversation, every project you take on at work.
It's all a test.
Right, it is an evaluation of your permanent worth.
Yeah.
If you try a hard task and fail, the world now knows your fixed level is low. So why would you ever risk exposing a flaw? You become incentivized to only do things you are already good at.
Let's translate that into something deeply personal that we all experience. Think about choosing a romantic partner.
Oh, this is a great example.
In a fixed mindset, what kind of partner do you subconsciously seek out? You want someone who puts you on a pedestal. You want someone who worships your fixed traits, who tells you you're flawless, brilliant, and perfect just the way you are.
Right, you want a fan.
Yes. You want uncritical acceptance because it validates your static identity. But in a growth mindset, the ideal partner is entirely different. You want someone who challenges you, someone who calls you out on your blind spots, who sees your flaws, but encourages you to improve. It's the difference between wanting a fan club that claps for your current state and wanting a true partner in your personal evolution.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. And that behavioral difference, whether you are seeking validation or seeking evolution, it isn't just a psychological theory we can observe in relationships. It is literally visible in neurological data.
Which brings us back to that laboratory we discussed at the very beginning. Dweck's team actually brought individuals with both mindsets into a brainwave lab at Columbia University.
Oh, this is the study that absolutely blew my mind. Walk us through exactly what happened in that room. So they hooked these individuals up to EEG machines to measure their electrical brain activity down to the millisecond. The participants were asked incredibly difficult trivia questions. Now, an EEG machine can measure exactly when the brain is paying attention. It measures the amplitude of specific electrical signals. When a subject is deeply engaged on processing information, the wave spikes. When they're disengaged, it flattens.
Okay, so a spike means they care. A flat line means they don't.
Exactly. And the results of this experiment were staggering. For the individuals with a fixed mindset, their brain waves only showed active engagement, massive electrical spikes, when they were being told whether their answers were right or wrong.
So they're pouring all of their cognitive energy into the judgment, the grade, the verdict on their intelligence.
Exactly. They were obsessed with the verdict. But here is the critical defining moment of the study. If they got the answer wrong, and the researchers subsequently presented them with the correct information, the actual tutorial that could help them learn their brain waves, went flat. The signal died. There was zero sign of cognitive interest. They completely tuned out the opportunity to learn because the judgment had already been passed. They had been deemed wrong, so in their minds, the interaction was over.
It's like the fixed mindset brain is a camera with a shutter that only stays open long enough to take a picture of the final grade. And the second the F or the incorrect is recorded, the lens snaps shut to protect the ego from any more damage. But the growth mindset brain is a video camera that just keeps rolling to capture the tutorial.
That is exactly what the data showed for the growth mindset individuals. Their brains didn't spike just for the right or wrong verdict. Their brains paid close attention to the information that could stretch their knowledge. Their EEG readings lit up when the learning opportunity presented itself. Regardless of whether they initially got the question right or wrong, they were processing the how and the why of the correct answer.
That is terrifying when you stop and think about it. If you operate with a fixed mindset, your brain literally, physically shuts down when you make a mistake. Refusing to absorb the lesson, you become a closed loop. You are doomed to repeat the same mistakes because your internal operating system deletes the feedback.
You do. But this brings us to a massive fundamental problem with how we view success in our culture. Because we are about to touch on something that will likely make a lot of successful people deeply uncomfortable. Because if you secretly rely on your natural gifts, if you have coasted through life considering yourself a natural gizmo, you are in profound danger. This next insight completely shatters the myth of the effortless genius, and if you rely on your natural gifts, you are in profound danger.
Wait, hold on. I have to challenge this premise entirely.
Go for it.
I am looking at our culture, and we practically worship effortless genius. I mean, we love the narrative of the prodigy who just steps onto the tennis court or the stage or into the boardroom and dominates without breaking a sweat. We idolize the tech founder who drops out of college and builds a billion-dollar company in their dorm room seemingly overnight. If the author is right and relying on natural talent is a trap, then our entire societal reward system is fundamentally backwards. How does she reconcile the fact that society praises the exact thing she says is dangerous?
She reconciles it by pointing out that our societal obsession with the natural is exactly what creates the fixed mindset trap in the first place. The author argues that in a fixed mindset, effort is actually seen as a deeply negative thing. It is viewed as proof that you lack natural talent.
Because if you were truly a genius, you wouldn't need to try so hard.
Exactly. The fixed mindset logic dictates that true geniuses, true naturals, simply execute flawlessly. Therefore, if you have to sweat, study, practice, and grind, it means you are making up for a deficiency in your innate ability. To illustrate how destructive this is, the research contrasts two very different types of athletes. Consider John McEnroe.
Oh, yeah.
He was arguably one of the most naturally gifted, physically intuitive tennis players in the history of the sport. But he possessed a deeply, painfully fixed mindset.
I'm familiar with his story in the book. He is infamous for his tantrums, the screaming at umpires, the smash rackets. But what the book points out, which I found fascinating, is that those tantrums weren't just him being a bad boy. They were a direct symptom of his fixed mindset.
Yes.
Because he relied so heavily on his natural ability and his identity as a prodigy, he actively avoided practicing the things he was bad at. When he lost a match or even just dropped a set, he almost never looked at his own deficiencies. He couldn't. It would break his identity. So he blamed the weather. He blamed the officials. He even famously blamed sawdust on the court for a missed shot.
Yes, sawdust. Because he was terrified of giving absolute 100% effort and still failing. Because if you give everything you have and you lose, the excuse of, I didn't really try my best, is gone.
Right.
Your self-worth as a natural genius is permanently shattered at that point. By throwing a tantrum and losing focus, McEnroe could always protect his ego. He could say, I only lost because I got distracted by the terrible umpire. It was a defense mechanism to protect the label of genius.
And the stark contrast to that defense mechanism is someone like Michael Jordan, who, his famous lore at this point was cut from his high school varsity basketball team.
Exactly. Jordan was not considered a natural in his early years. He didn't have the effortless glide that scouts were looking for at age 15, but he had an obsessive, almost clinical growth mindset. When he was cut, he didn't conclude that he lacked the basketball gene. He went home, cried, and then started practicing relentlessly, far beyond the requirements of any of his peers. Or look at Babe Ruth.
Another great example.
Another phenomenal historical example from the text. Ruth didn't possess the sleek, athletic build of a natural runner or fielder. He was famously out of shape by modern athletic standards. But what the mythology leaves out is that Ruth analyzed his swing compulsively. He experimented constantly at the plate. He worked incredibly hard to understand the physics of his swing and convert his physical frame into a powerhouse. The myth tells us these people were born great. The reality, the hard data of their biographies, shows they worked their way to greatness through agonizing, methodical effort.
So what this all means is that the true hallmark of a champion isn't effortless execution. That is a Hollywood illusion designed to sell shoes and movie tickets. The actual hallmark of a champion is the capacity to convert life's inevitable setbacks into future successes. It is the willingness to look at a failure, extract the raw data from it without letting it crush your ego, and put in the exhausting effort to rebuild. In the growth mindset, effort isn't a sign of weakness. Effort is the very mechanism that actually makes you smart or talented.
Right. But if the fixed mindset views effort as a weakness, what happens when that effort is expended and it still doesn't pay off? Because this completely changes the definition of failure from something that happens to you to something that you inherently are.
And this is where the psychological stakes get incredibly high.
They do. Dweck proposes that our mindsets change the very definition of the word failure. For a fixed mindset, failure is an identity. It transforms from an action like, I failed this specific math test, into a permanent noun. I am a failure.
Wow.
The event becomes a tattoo on your identity. But for a growth mindset, failure remains just an action. It simply means you are not growing in that specific area yet, or you haven't applied the right strategy to reach your potential.
That sounds incredibly healthy in theory, but let's be totally real for a second. We aren't just talking about failing a pop quiz in middle school. What about the real crushing barriers of life? Failing a high-stakes bar exam, losing a high-paying job, or having a company you poured your life savings into go bankrupt. That isn't just an abstract learning opportunity that you can neatly journal about. That is a devastating real-world consequence with financial and social ruin. How does a growth mindset actually survive contact with a truly crushing defeat?
It survives because the profound pain of the defeat, and the pain is very real, does not permanently brand the core value of the individual. To understand how failure as an identity destroys people, Dweck provides a deeply illustrative, almost chilling story in the book about a couple, the Martins.
Oh, this story.
They worship their 3-year-old son, Robert. They constantly brag to their friends about his fixed traits, how he was the brightest, most exceptionally creative child in existence. They built their own parental identity around having produced a genius. But then, Robert failed to get into the #1 elite preschool in New York City.
A 3-year-old was rejected from preschool, and it triggered a psychological crisis. Because to a fixed mindset, traits are innate and supposedly detectable even in a toddler.
Exactly. And the parents' reaction was the most tragic part of the story. Because they held a fixed mindset, they didn't see this as a simple mismatch of schools or a minor hurdle or just the random luck of a competitive admissions process. They saw it as an objective, permanent measurement of Robert's fundamental worth. After that rejection letter arrived, they cooled toward him. They actively stopped showing him the same deep pride and affection. In their eyes, the failure had permanently defined his identity. He went from being their genius to being a reject.
That is absolutely heartbreaking. They withdrew their love because his failure threatened their own fixed mindset about having a perfect child. It wasn't about his learning, it was about their status.
Now contrast that tragic, identity-crushing outcome with a fascinating study Dweck highlights regarding depressed college freshmen. Transitioning to a university is a high-stakes, incredibly stressful environment, and statistically, many students fall into clinical depression during their first year. The researchers tracked how students with different mindsets handled this deeply depressive state. The students with a fixed mindset let the depression paralyze them. They gave up, skipped classes, stopped turning in assignments, and let their grades plummet. Their internal narrative was, "I am failing at college, therefore I don't belong here. I am an imposter."
They took the feeling of depression as an ultimate truth about their capability. But the growth mindset students?
The growth mindset students felt the exact same level of depression. They felt the same physical lethargy, the same emotional pain. But they used those depressed feelings as a catalyst rather than a conclusion. The worse they felt, the more they forced themselves to take mechanical action. They used the pain as an alarm bell to get out of bed, do their reading, and physically walk to the teaching assistants' offices to ask for help. They viewed the academic and emotional struggle as a complex problem to be managed, not an identity to be suffered.
That is the crucial pivot point. The pain is real, the depression is real, the bankruptcy is real, but the meaning assigned to that pain is a choice. And listen, if you want to survive the brutal, unforgiving realities of the business world, you cannot afford to skip this next part. What we are about to discuss requires you to take a hard, uncomfortable look in the mirror and make a real change in how you lead your life and your teams. Because if you carry that fixed mindset into a corner office, you are going to destroy your own organization.
You are absolutely right. Taking that fixed, defensive posture into the corporate world leads to catastrophic results. Corporate environments heavily, historically favor fixed mindsets. The traditional corporate ladder is almost explicitly designed to reward people who look flawless, who never admit to making mistakes, and who project absolute, unwavering certainty in every meeting.
Which is just, it's impossible.
Right, but it breeds a deeply toxic corporate culture and what Dweck diagnoses as CEO disease. CEO disease is the intense psychological desire to reign from a pedestal, to be seen as a perfect oracle of business, and to surround oneself with worshipers rather than competent challengers. And historically, it absolutely destroys companies from the inside out. Before we go further, if you want to get deeper on mindset, the new psychology of success, the easiest way is to get the actual audiobook on Audible. You can get it free with an Audible trial. We have linked it right below in the description so you can go straight to the source, directly supporting Deep Dive Audiobook English.
Seriously, it's worth it. The case studies alone are a masterclass. Okay, back to the CEO disease. Because this next part is the one most people get completely wrong. We are culturally conditioned to assume that the most aggressive, most confident, most dictatorial CEOs are the best leaders, the ones who never show weakness.
But the long-term financial data tells a drastically different story. Dweck dissects the careers of two notorious fixed-mindset CEOs to show how the mechanics of this disease actually work. The first is Lee Iacocca at Chrysler. After some initial brilliant success reviving the company, Iacocca fell victim to CEO disease. His identity became entirely fused with being the savior of the American auto industry. He needed to be the hero, the flawless genius on the magazine covers. So instead of innovating and taking the necessary risks to build new technology, he just kept bringing out the same tired car models, the K-car platform, with superficial, cosmetic changes. He surrounded himself with yes-men, exiled any executives who dared to bring him critical market data, and completely lost touch with the consumer.
While the Japanese automakers like Honda and Toyota were fundamentally rethinking the engineering of the automobile and capturing market share, Chrysler stagnated because Iacocca was too busy protecting his image as a genius to actually learn what the market wanted.
Exactly. His ego became a bottleneck for the entire corporation. And the second example is even more extreme, showing the darker side of this mindset. Albert Dunlap.
Albert Chainsaw L. Dunlap at Sunbeam.
Yes. Dunlap was a self-professed superstar. His entire strategy was built on short-term heroics, designed to boost the stock price temporarily and make himself look like a financial genius to Wall Street analysts. He fired thousands of workers, ruthlessly gutted the company's long-term infrastructure, and explicitly stated he didn't care about the employees, the products, or the community. His only focus was shareholder profit, because that was the singular metric that proved his genius label to the world. The stock soared briefly, giving him the validation he craved, but the company ultimately fell apart under the weight of his ego-driven fixed-mindset decisions, culminating in massive accounting scandals to cover up the fact that the underlying business was rotting.
So what is the actual antidote to that? Because you can't just be nice in business. I mean, you still have to turn a profit and make hard decisions. The antidote, according to the research, is found in the growth mindset leaders. Take Anne Mulcahy. She took over Xerox when it was essentially a smoking crater, billions of dollars in debt, plummeting stock prices, failing business models. She didn't march into the boardroom pretending to have all the answers just to look like a savior. She embraced brutal, uncomfortable learning. She told her employees the absolute truth about how bad things were. She actively sought out criticism, and she famously slept on the floor of airplanes traveling across the country to meet clients and hear their complaints firsthand. She turned the company around by dropping the ego and focusing entirely on the process of learning.
And similarly, we see this with Lou Gerstner at IBM. When Gerstner arrived, IBM was suffocating under its own elitism and a deeply entrenched hierarchical fixed mindset. Everyone in upper management wanted to be a prince, protecting their fiefdoms, and no one wanted to do the actual collaborative work of building software. Gerstner stepped in and systematically destroyed the hierarchy. He tied executive bonuses to the company's overall performance rather than individual unit metrics, forcing them to work together. He demanded teamwork, open communication, and execution over presentation. He completely transformed the culture from one of proving our individual genius to serving the customer and executing the job.
It is the shift from a culture of genius to a culture of development. But that raises a massive question. How does a culture of genius start in the first place? It doesn't start in the boardroom. It starts early in childhood, which brings us to an incredibly counterintuitive insight: the mechanics of constructive criticism and the profound danger of praise.
This is the area of Dweck's research that receives the most pushback because it defies common sense. Dweck argues, backed by extensive trials, that praising a child's intelligence actually harms them. We think we are building an armor of confidence when we tell someone, "You are so smart," but we are actually pushing them directly into a fixed mindset.
Break down the mechanics of why that happens, because it feels so natural to tell a kid they are smart when they do something well.
It does feel natural, but when you praise someone's inherent intelligence or talent, you are handing them a label. You're telling them your value comes from this fixed trait, and the moment they accept that label, they have to protect it. If they try something hard and fail, the label is in jeopardy. The logic in their brain says, if success means I am smart, then failure means I am dumb. So, to protect the dopamine hit of being called smart, they begin to subconsciously avoid challenges. They choose the easy path, the safe project, the guaranteed A, to ensure they keep the smart sticker firmly attached to their identity.
Oh man, I see this everywhere with my generation and the generation entering the workforce right now. parents in the 90s and 2000s were absolutely obsessed with the self-esteem movement. We thought confidence was something you could just inject into a kid with words. We overpraised kids. Every finger painting was a masterpiece. Every kid was a genius. Everyone got a trophy just for showing up. And the real-world economic impact today is a modern workforce that requires constant, exhausting reassurance. We have young professionals who can't function without a sticker for every move, who crumble and cry at the first sign of critical feedback from a manager because their entire core identity was built on being effortlessly smart.
It creates a deeply fragile workforce. When the foundation of your self-esteem is a label you didn't earn through effort, the slightest breeze of criticism blows the house down. So what is the alternative? How do you praise correctly, whether you are a parent, a teacher, or a CEO? Dweck's research shows we must praise the process. You praise the effort, the strategy, the focus, and the resilience. Instead of saying, you got an A, you are so smart, you say, I'm so impressed by the strategy you used to study for that test. Your focus really paid off. You praise the variables they can actually control.
The book uses a great, highly practical example of a father reacting to his son's sloppy, rushed homework. The fixed mindset reaction is to attack the child's intelligence or character. This is garbage. You are dense. Can't you ever get anything right? That damages the child's identity and creates a combative relationship with learning.
Right. But the growth mindset father addresses the substandard work without assassinating the child's character. He might sit down and say, it makes me frustrated when you don't do a full job. This looks like a really boring assignment. Is there a way we can make this more interesting so you can actually learn something from it and still do a good job? It separates the action, the sloppy homework, from the identity of the child. It invites the child to find a strategic solution. It asks, how can we improve this process? Rather than declaring you are fundamentally broken.
It completely reframes the interaction from a judge handing down a sentence to a collaborator trying to solve a puzzle, and it works for managing adults just as well as raising kids.
It does. And as we move into how to actually apply this to our own internal monologues, I promise you the upcoming synthesis is the moment everything clicks together. You will finally possess the complete toolkit to rewrite your internal operating system. But first, we have to navigate one final insidious trap that catches almost everyone who reads this book.
The trap of knowing the terminology but not doing the actual work. The false growth mindset. Because let's be honest, growth mindset has become a massive corporate buzzword. Every HR seminar talks about it. Every teacher has a motivational poster of a mountain on their wall with the words growth mindset printed on it. And because it has become so socially acceptable, a lot of people just claim they have it without actually changing their behavior.
Dweck actually had to add this section in later editions of the book because she was horrified to see her life's work being weaponized or misunderstood. People were using it to excuse poor performance, saying things like, hey, I'm trying my best, growth mindset, without actually implementing new strategies or seeking feedback. Or worse, managers and teachers were scolding people for having a fixed mindset, turning it into yet another label to judge people by, oh, you're just being fixed mindset right now. The biological and psychological reality is that no one has a 100% pure growth mindset. It doesn't exist. We are all a complex mixture of both. We all have specific triggers, a certain type of criticism, a specific colleague, a particular type of task that immediately snap us back into a fixed, defensive, ego-protecting state.
So if we all have it, and we can't just banish it with positive thinking, how do we actually deal with it? How do we put this into practice when the pressure is on and our ego feels threatened?
The most actionable psychological tactic Dweck recommends is to literally name your fixed mindset persona. You have to personify that inner voice of doubt, judgment, and fear. The book gives some wonderful, highly effective examples. One professional named his doubt voice Dale Denton, after Seth Rogen's lazy, paranoid, bumbling character in the movie Pineapple Express. Whenever this professional faced a daunting new project and started feeling inadequate, he would recognize that anxious voice and say to himself, oh, this is just Dale waking up to tell me I can't do it because Dale hates working hard. Another example was a grade school student who was completely paralyzed by a fear of failure. He finally named his persona Dumping Dan because he felt like whenever he tried to learn something new, this voice in his head just dumped on him and told him he was stupid.
I love that.
Ugh.
By giving it a ridiculous name, you strip it of its power. It's no longer the absolute objective truth of who you are. It's just this annoying passenger in the car with you. You create cognitive distance.
Exactly. Neuroscience shows that effective labeling, putting a name to an emotion, actually reduces the activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. You don't try to suppress the fixed mindset or ban it because psychological suppression just makes the fear stronger. When you personify the fixed mindset, you can actually talk to it. You can educate it. When you are about to take a massive risk at work and Dale Denton starts screaming in your head that you're going to embarrass yourself and lose your job, you could say, look, Dale, I know you're trying to protect me from looking foolish. I appreciate the concern, but I really want to take a stab at this. Come along for the ride, but I'm driving. You invite it to join you on the journey rather than letting it grab the steering wheel and crash the car.
That is such a powerful visualization. You're acknowledging the biological fear without letting it dictate your behavior. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of psychological ground here. Let's unpack this and pull all these threads together.
To synthesize this, we need to look at how these deeply researched insights interconnect into a single, unified worldview. Let's look at the 4 major pillars we've discussed. First, the EEG brainwave data. We saw the physical evidence that a fixed mindset stops the brain from paying attention to learning, forcing it to obsess only over judgment and grades. Second, we dismantled the myth of the natural redefining effort, not as a sign of weakness, but as the actual engine of mastery. Third, we explored the profound new meaning of failure, shifting it from a permanent damning identity that destroys your self-worth to a temporary action that merely provides raw data for your next attempt. And finally, we just discussed the power of naming the persona, which allows us to gracefully accept that we all harbor these fixed mindset fears without letting them control us.
So what does this all mean when you step back and look at the architecture of your life?
It means we are fundamentally talking about 2 entirely different ways of living. The old life, governed by the fixed mindset, is a judge and be judged framework. Every action you take, every project you submit, every interaction you have is a high-stakes test of your permanent worth. It is an exhausting, defensive, deeply anxious posture where you are constantly trying to validate your intelligence to the world while desperately hiding your flaws.
It sounds like a miserable way to live.
It is. But the new life, built on the framework of the growth mindset, is a learn and help learn paradigm. In this life, your fundamental worth is not on the table to be judged. Obstacles are simply data points for improvement. The people around you aren't competitors threatening your status. They are collaborators you can learn from. You stop trying to prove you are flawless, and you start focusing entirely on the messy, beautiful process of becoming better.
It is the ultimate psychological relief. You can finally exhale. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be willing to grow. So let's make this highly actionable. If you are listening to this on your commute or at the gym or sitting at your desk, here are 3 concrete, immediate steps you can take today to start shifting your internal operating system. Step 1, audit your triggers. Pay close attention today to the exact moment you feel the sudden urge to quit a task because it got unexpectedly difficult. Recognize that tight, defensive feeling in your chest. That is your fixed mindset activating. It is not a sign that you lack ability. It is just a biological trigger trying to protect your ego. Notice it. Don't judge it, just observe it.
Awareness is always the first step to dismantling a deeply wired habit.
Exactly. Step 2, change your praise. Tomorrow, consciously stop praising anyone, your kids, your coworkers, and especially yourself for being smart or talented. Ban those identity labels from your vocabulary for 1 entire week. Instead, praise the specific strategy, the focus, or the grit used to solve a problem. Praise the process and watch how it changes your interactions. And step 3, name your persona. Right now, think of a ridiculous name for that fixed mindset voice in your head. Give it an identity today so you can politely tell it to take a back seat the next time you face a terrifying challenge.
That cognitive separation of identity is the absolute key to lasting behavioral change.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We spend so much of our precious energy terrified of failing, terrified of looking foolish in front of our peers. But what if the greatest failure in your life isn't the time you tried and lost, but the time you protected your fragile ego by not trying at all, just so you could safely say to yourself, could have been great if I had really tried. If this deep dive changed how you view your own potential, hit subscribe to ensure you never miss a breakthrough. And head down to the comments right now and tell us, what are you going to name your fixed mindset persona? We read all of them, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. Join us this Friday for our next deep dive, where we are going to pivot into Pillar 2 and break down the foundational frameworks of wealth building. You will not want to miss it. Thanks for exploring with us, and we'll see you next time on Deep Dive Audiobook English.